In this video, we will discuss tone. The importance of tone in writing. We'll define it, and then we'll discuss the tone of two very short poems. For a Lamb by Richard Eberhardt, and Apparently with No Surprise by Emily Dickinson. And then we'll go over some of the common errors that we need to watch out for when trying to identify the tone in a piece of writing. Tone is super important to consider when we're trying to figure out what something means. Things can have very different meanings depending on the tone in which it is delivered. Consider this phrase. "Oh, you're so smart." When said with a warm, approving tone, it's a sincere compliment, praising someone's intelligence. "Oh, you're so smart." If said with a sarcastic or mocking tone, it should be interpreted as an insincere comment, implying that the person might not be smart at all. "Oh, you're so smart." If said in a tone tinged with envy, it could convey a sense of jealousy or resentment toward a person's intelligence. "Oh, you're so smart." When spoken in a condescending tone, it will come across as dismissive and belittling, suggesting that a person's intelligence is being underestimated. The actual words actually carry some meaning, but so much of the meaning is communicated through the tone in which it is delivered. That was fun. Let's try another phrase. This phrase could be said in a curious tone, a critical tone, a playful tone, or a surprise tone. Try them out. Again, the words are exactly the same, but the tone communicates very different meanings. One more time, this phrase. See if you can't name the tone when I say, "I guess we'll see." "I guess we'll see." Or, "I guess we'll see." Or, "I guess we'll see." The tone of voice significantly shapes how even a simple phrase is to be understood, and what emotion is supposed to be evoked in the listener. Tone is also very important for any form of writing, but the problem with reading a text, a poem for instance, is that the tone is not communicated with a literal voice. So how are you supposed to know what the tone of a poem is? Tone can be achieved through a combination of all sorts of things, including diction, imagery, figurative language, symbolism, rhythm and meter, sentence structure, repetition, sound devices, narrative perspectives, enjambment and line breaks, the title, and even the form the poem takes. For instance, if you're reading a sonnet, there is a good chance that the tone will be serious, and if the poem is in the form of a limerick, the tone will probably be funny. So let's define tone. The tone of a poem is the author's attitude toward the subject. Well, usually toward the subject. It can be the attitude toward the audience, or the speaker, or even toward him or herself. But usually it's the subject. Let's look at two poems that deal with the same subject. They both deal with death in the natural world, but the tone of each is very different from the other. The author's attitudes toward death are very different. This is For a Lamb by Richard Eberhardt. I'm going to try to read it without too much tone so that we can figure that out just by using the text. "I saw on the slant hill a putrid lamb, propped with daisies. The sleep looked deep. The face was nudged in the green pillow, but the guts were out for the crows to eat. Where is the lamb whose tender plaint said all for the mute breezes? Say he's in the wind somewhere, say there's a lamb in the daisies." So, the title. It kind of sounds like it's going to be one of those poems that Grandma has cross-stitched to hang up in the baby's room. Lambs are a traditional symbol of innocence. So are daisies, by the way. So these are nice things. So what's the deal with putrid? And the guts and crows? These are not nice things. This stanza is holding these two things in tension. It's a fact that all living things die, even those cute little symbols of innocence, lambs. And these crows, which are traditional symbols of death and darkness, are just doing what crows do naturally, even though it's kind of disgusting. These things are natural, and because they're natural, well, in a sense, they're okay. The first stanza has this metaphor. The sleep looked deep. The lamb is dead, but death is softened by referring to it as a deep sleep, and the grass being a green pillow. Again, this makes death not seem like such a horrible thing. So this stanza brings together the innocence and the natural processes of nature, which include the death of all things. The second stanza gets a little more philosophical. The lamb is dead, and the body that remains isn't really the lamb. Something is missing. For one thing, the tender plaint, the sound that lambs make. This lamb was able to say what the breezes could not. So there's a sense of loss here, But this loss is again softened, because the lamb isn't completely gone. He's in the wind somewhere, and in the daisies. The wind in this context is a symbol of spirit, and the lamb is with or in the wind. As far as the lamb being in the daisies, the meaning goes beyond the idea that the lamb is currently resting amongst the daisies, but is in them, as the body decomposes and feeds the daisies through natural processes. Being in the wind and in the flowers directs us to consider the lamb being reintegrated into nature. So what's the tone of this poem? Well, we need to capture the idea that there's a loss associated with the death of the lamb. So the author's attitude is sadness over that loss. But sad doesn't really capture the whole tone. There's something comforting about the way nature works. So death as part of nature is okay. So the tone? Sad acceptance. Now let's look at another poem, Apparently with No Surprise by Emily Dickinson. Again, I will try to read this tonelessly. Apparently with no surprise to any happy flower, the frost beheads it at its play in accidental power. The blonde assassin passes on, the sun proceeds unmoved, to measure off another day for an approving God. So what's the tone of this poem? Well, let's start with the word apparently. The word means that something appears to be true based on what is known. So what is the speaker talking about? What's not surprising? We have a happy flower. And what is the happy flower doing? It's playing. So what's happy and plays? A child, right? So here we have this flower that's personified as a child, playing happily. Can you see all that sweet innocence and beauty? Perhaps it's playing on a swing. La 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 la. Bam! The child is beheaded. That's one of the most horrible ways to die in a playground. On a literal level, the frost has killed the flower. This happens every autumn. It's a regular thing. It's part of nature. Because it is beautiful and a murderer of innocence, the frost is called the blonde assassin. And notice its power is accidental. This execution was not premeditated. And then we have the line, the sun proceeds unmoved. This is an oxymoron. Unmoved here means that the sun is not affected emotionally. The sun sees what the frost does to the flower and doesn't give a crap. It just carries on, doing what it does. It measures off another day. And it does this for a God who apparently, remember the first line, is okay with all this. So in For a Lamb, death was seen as natural, so it was okay. In this poem, death is part of the created order as well. But the author's attitude toward it is entirely different. What is the author's attitude toward this reality? If we put all this together, a happy, innocent creature is carelessly executed, and God apparently is good with that. Even as I'm trying to explain what this poem means, it's hard for me to keep the speaker's anger out of my voice. Can you hear the anger? Let me read it to you again with some tone. Apparently with no surprise to any happy flower, the frost beheads it at its play in accidental power. The blonde assassin passes on, the sun proceeds unmoved to measure off another day for an approving God. Yes, the poem has an angry tone, and it was achieved by all kinds of things that are found in the text. Diction, figurative language, symbolism. So 2 short poems about the same thing, the idea that death is natural, but with very different tone. Here is a list of words that can be used to describe tone in a piece of writing. This list is not exhaustive. There are a lot more, but these can give you an idea of the kinds of words to use when describing tone. Remember that whatever word you choose to describe tone needs to be in a form that describes an attitude. Now here are 6 common errors to watch out for when attempting to identify the tone of a poem. Simplifying too much. Describing the tone with a word like happy or sad might not capture the complexity of the poem's tone. Consider using 2 words if you need to. A poem might be cautiously optimistic or playfully intimate. We did that with For a Lamb. Sad was part of the tone, but by itself that's not adequate. The poem is about more than that, overlooking nuances. Failing to recognize shifts or changes in tone within the poem can result in a limited understanding of its emotional range. The tone of the second stanza in For a Lamb is a little different than the first. It's more philosophical, and that's where we find most of the accepting tone, projecting personal feelings. Assuming that the tone of the poem matches your own emotions can result in a biased interpretation. For a Lamb is a poem about a dead lamb, and that idea might make you sad. But that doesn't mean that the tone of the poem must be sad. As always, focus on the text. Misinterpreting irony. If a poem employs irony, the tone might be opposite of what the words are actually saying. Interpreting too literally can lead to inaccuracies. Relying solely on keywords. Simply cherry-picking a few keywords won't lead you to tone. And confusing the speaker with the poet. The speaker is speaking in the poem, but tone is the author's attitude toward the subject, not the speaker's. That's one of the reasons why this differentiation is very important. So I hope that helps, as you will be thinking and writing about tone in poetry and in all kinds of other writing, including your own. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.